Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink program. I'm your host, Chiara Imella. Coming up, we get a taste of Chilean cuisine at a brand new opening in London.
It's a superfood. It's only found in Chile, and there's a limited quantity that can be harvested in any 1 year. But we're using that in our menu as well.
Also on the program, we explore the network of food businesses honouring and preserving First Nations traditions in Canada.
I participate in an indigenous fishery called the Tuckwiak fishery. Twice a week we do crabs, twice a week we're doing kelp, and then maybe once a month I do goosenecks right now.
Plus, it's crunch time for this show's producer Monica Lillis as she delves into the world's fascination with crisps. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. Sometimes eating out in a big city can feel like no cuisine is unrepresented. But even in a scene as diverse as London's, there remain some gaps, and restaurateur Prinay Agarwal saw one for a Chilean restaurant. Though not from the South American nation himself, but with a partner who hails from there, he fell in love with the country's dishes and felt they deserved to be recognised beyond its borders too. While Peruvian, Mexican and Argentinian cuisines may have long established themselves on the world stage, there are plenty of specialties from Chile that remain unknown to most. Enter Mareida, Prinay's new restaurant in London's Fitzrovia. Here, the menu is a handy showcase of the variety at the heart of this cuisine, given the nation's vast geographical span across different climates and latitudes, and the different terrains from mountains to beaches squeezed in this thin, long slither of land. Earlier, Prinay joined me in the studio to tell me more about the specialties that define this Andean nation and why his project actually goes beyond food alone.
My partner Benjamin is from Santiago. And after we got married, I spent a lot of time in the country. He was working there, and I saw it as a great opportunity to spend some time over there and see what the country was all about. So while he was working, I was kind of eating a lot, to be honest. I was so curious. As a family, we traveled a lot for food. I grew up in many different cities, from Hong Kong, London. I lived in Milan for a bit. But food has always been a really important experience for us. So we've sometimes flown just for the day to try a restaurant that seems interesting to us. And when I went to Chile, I thought, I don't know that much about Chilean food. And when I asked people about it, nobody seems to know. But in the back of my mind, I felt there has to be a really important storytelling here. When you look at the country on the map, it's so long and vast that there has to be so many different ingredients that we just don't know about. So during that time when we were in Santiago and trying lots of food and getting a better feeling about, what's happening in the country, we had this idea and we thought, why don't we try and map the culinary identity of Chile, surrounded by culture and all the talent that we were discovering, and maybe create a flagship space in London where we can showcase all of this as the first export of the food and the design and the culture that's happened anywhere. So that's how everything started.
How did Chilean food surprise you? What expectations did you have of it? What did you find on the ground, and what version of it are you bringing from this experience into London?
I think I had a similar impression of what most people have, which is, maybe, is it more Peruvian? Is it more Argentinian? Those are the cuisines that people have a reference to when they think about South American food. So I was kind of unsure about what to expect. I knew that the seafood was really important because you have a vast coastline along the Pacific Ocean, and I thought that there would be a heavy seafood influence, and that was correct. I got exposed to a lot of varieties of fish and seafood that you don't find in other countries, almost alien-like creatures that it takes a few seconds to is this edible or not? But I think after a bit of time, you open your mind to trying different flavors and things that maybe I wouldn't have done before. And I think it's some of those flavors that we really want to bring to London. The menu is not 100% seafood focused. It's trying to give a feeling of the diversity of the landscapes that you have there. The coastline, the Andes, the desert, the lakes. You have fjords. So you really have an interesting mix of vegetables, seafood, meat. But also in these different regions, you have different herbs and spices that you only find in Chile. For example, in the north, in Atacama, you have a herb called rica rica, and it has that sort of Moorish, earthy flavor to it, which is something that we put in one of our pisco sours in the pop-up. In the south, you have a berry called a maqui berry, which is sort of like the Chilean version of the acai berry. It's a superfood. It's only found in Chile, and there's a limited quantity that can be harvested in any 1 year. But we're using that in our menu as well. Obviously, it's not easy to bring all of that seafood to the UK. It's difficult to export it. There's sustainability issues surrounding it as well. But there's one particular seafood called pure, which is the most alien looking like out of all of them, and has a very particular flavor. It's a little bit stronger than a sea urchin, but we really wanted to bring that to the pop-up in September that we did in Carousel. And what we did is we dehydrated it and turned it into a powder that we infused into a granita. So it gave people the taste of that particular ingredient rather than bringing the actual puree to London itself.
I have to admit that when I did eat at the pop-up, it was the first time I'd ever had Chilean food. And I would say that London has a vast array of restaurants from any cuisine in the world. But this is pretty unique. Why do you think when Peruvian, as you mentioned, Argentinian food has traveled so far and wide, why did Chilean food kind of lag behind when it comes to international reputation?
I think Peru had a natural fusion of very interesting cultures of Japanese and Peruvian. And I think they created a really strong brand around it. People were familiar with Japanese food. So when they developed Nikkei, it was something that was kind of familiar, but they did a really good push around creating the brand around the food. I think Chile is a country which is quite protected, referring back to the coastline on one side and then the Andes on the other side. It's really boxed in compared to the other South American countries, which share a lot of borders. But it's not so easy to cross from Chile to Argentina because you need to cross the Andes mountain range. And I think that idea of being protected has limited how much the country has been exposed or the possibility to create a brand around the different areas, not just food, but also design and culture. Our learning was that after the pandemic, when a lot of chefs came back to Chile, they implemented a lot of the techniques that they learned from Paris and Tokyo into traditional ingredients and techniques. And that's when you started to see a wave of restaurants which are trying new things and trying to showcase their heritage and culture in a way that hadn't been done before. And that's what excited us the most about this. It's this idea of channeling all of that creative energy into a concept to be the first one that is creating that brand around Chilean gastronomy.
Well, you're referring here to a very deliberate kind of attempt to build brand. And, the project as it stands also includes design and art. How important do you think it was to sort of build this entire world around it and not just go for the food, but actually span so far and wide? And what sort of experience did you have in all these fields as well? Because already opening a restaurant is difficult enough, but becoming a sort of a curator is a whole another story.
I think it started off initially as a food-focused concept. Very shortly after we started speaking to the chefs, there was so much energy that got attracted to what we were doing because people saw it as an opportunity to show what they're doing and all of the talent in a space in central London. So we very quickly put together a team of incredible people from the architect Macarena, Connie Gaguero, who did the branding, and she does incredible projects like the pavilions at the Biennale and the National Museums, MoMA, the chefs Carolina and her wife Rosario. The amount of energy that came together was so fast and so intense in a positive way that it was only natural that this concept evolved to become a showcase of more than food. I think having the possibility to have a space where people can show what they're doing became so interesting. And everyone is so good at what they do that it would be a shame not to bring all of their work and design into the concept that we're doing. I think the natural evolution was also to create a space which is evolving. So that's why we're working with artists And we want to have this idea of rotating chefs, rotating wine lists, rotating artists, musicians, and every season reflect the changes that are happening in the country, in the space that we have over here as well.
I also wonder, where did the decision to go for a specific version of Chilean food came from? Because there is a risk when you're introducing sort of a new cuisine to a public that doesn't really have a point of reference to what the sort of the original traditional version of what they're eating is, that they might sort of be a bit lost and not really have points of reference there. What was the decision in sort of going directly for the sort of like modern contemporary aspect and not just soothe people with the good old traditional ways?
I think, again, it happened quite naturally. And one of the first things that happened was people told me that I was taking on a huge responsibility of representing Chilean food and culture in London. And I didn't realize that because, like you said, it was the first time it had been done. That's when the idea of the pop-ups happened. And the first pop-up we did before Carousel was in Santiago in March. And that's when we wanted to get the feedback of how do Chilean people who have a connection to London feel we are representing their cuisine to a global audience. And it was really important to get that first level of feedback. And we chose to work with a menu which was using the ingredients, the techniques, but not so traditional, so that we have a base to build from. Because we have a lot of dishes which are twists on traditional dishes, like the pastel de choclo and replacing the protein with something more vegetable-based or meats which are not traditionally used. But I think defining the approach, it was really important to go through that process of the pop-up and get feedback of Chileans, not just people who have a connection to London, but other chefs who have restaurants in Santiago, understanding what they're doing and understanding what was important or what are the key things that were unique to Chile that we should have in our menu and showcase over here.
What about these things? Because I remember from that meal being served a dish of scallops and kind of Parmesan cream and being like, this is a combination I've never experienced before and would never think it would work. And then it turns out it's a very kind of overt reference to something that's very traditional in Chile. So what are these kind of stars of the menu that hark back to some of these great classics?
I think what you mentioned is a really interesting one. The combination of cheese and seafood can be a little bit confusing. And, you know, I lived in Italy as well. And when our Italian friends came, they were like, oh my God, how can you do this? But when we went to the restaurant Ambrosia in Santiago with one of our Italian friends, we had the pasta dish, which was crab and cheese together. And actually the combination worked really well. And we were explaining to her that in Chile, especially on the beach, people have a lot of seafood like gratin. So you have a dish called machas, which is a type of mussel, which they make with cheese and they grill it and you have it on the beach with a pisco sour. And it's something that every single Chilean has a reference to. So we wanted to give that experience of being at the beach on Chile, having this dish, but in a slightly more elevated version. And that's how the scallop parmesan dish came about. We also changed the scallop for the oyster mushroom so that the vegetarian guests could also have that experience. That's one example of how like a traditional dish, which is very specific to Chile, was interpreted in what we're doing.
That was Prine Agarwal speaking to me at Midori House. This is the menu. In Canada, Indigenous traditions around sourcing ingredients have long been about a respectful relationship with nature. And now, on the remote, rugged edge of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, the small town of Tofino is the setting for an exciting partnership between Indigenous fishers and foragers and local chefs. Lucy Hyslop calls in at its harbour and the stories we can inish in to learn about the cultural significance of living off the land and ocean.
My name is Stevie Dennis, and I am the owner and founder of Nos Foods. Nos means day, daylight, reality, and creator in my people's language. My people are the Hausat First Nations. We are part of the Nachalnith people. So we are looking out in between Calnat and Lone Cone up Bedwell Sound. Those are the glaciers that you can see. Quite a nice little office right here, hey? And right in front of the ocean on a pier. I participate in an indigenous fishery called the Tukwiak fishery. Twice a week we do crabs, twice a week we're doing kelp, and then maybe once a month I do goosenecks right now.
Fishing with the permission of the hereditary chiefs, this group catches and sells all these barnacles and other species traditionally harvested in their territories, following BC's Supreme Court recognition of Aboriginal rights some 15 years ago. The First Nations have been on this land, after all, for millennia before settlers arrived, and with a recent colonial history of residential schools and not being allowed to celebrate potlatch feasts, there's a hard-fought re-emergence, with food playing a key part.
I try not to look into the dark or look into the light too much. I like to try and find that happy balance. And I think with all of these things going forward, everybody in every seat of power knows right from wrong. It only makes sense that the indigenous people are allowed to catch and sell their fish. Like, they were the ones who taught the first people to come over how to fish, and then it's created a commercial fishery that they get excluded from. It doesn't make sense. And I think just at the base of it all, we all know that it's a good thing for the community. It lets these communities' people do what they've been doing for thousands of years. And this fishery here has put indigenous fish in the limelight.
Two of his favourite indigenous specialities found in British Columbia: candied salmon with some modern twists, and traditional cold-smoked fish.
Some chamasuha. So candied salmon is a brined fish overnight. So you get your fresh fish, you're going to fillet it, you're going to pin bone it, you're going to brine it in a salt and sugar mixture. You let it cool with all this good brining action happening in the fridge, and then you're going to take it out in the morning, give it a rinse, let it tack up, cut it into strips that you want, and then you're going to smoke it to an internal temperature of 63 degrees. And this you're going to do alder with a maple sawdust. In it all, you just want that smoky flavor, and then you're going to glaze it with, we like to do a candy with a lemon zest. Oof, it's popular. And these are beautiful, almost like a little piece of chocolate, but it's candied salmon. You can't go wrong. And then the next most popular one that we do is a maple orange zest. There's upsqueak, which is a traditional smoked fish, and that's going to be closer to a cold smoke, cooler temperatures, and long smoking time. So the fish is actually so preserved that all you need to do is put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in your cupboard. So within the communities, you'll see the smokehouses on a lot of people's properties. And at the end of the season, everybody gets their food fish because all the fish get closer into the inlets, and they'll go out and get a bunch of fish, and then everybody gets processing, and they all hang it up, and all the smokehouses are going. Typically eaten with butter or traditionally oil. Very good for you. Lots of energy.
It's fishing time for Stevie, but he leaves me with a parting shot about the importance of his people's principles that everything is one and respect with caring.
I always take great pride in, because now it's been more than half of my life that I've been participating in this fishery, in knowing that our fish is handled very well with the utmost care and respect, and that it's going to a place where the people that are going to cook it are going to give it the utmost respect, and the people who are eating it, they're never going to forget their dinner.
Beside the old-growth forests and a mile-long sandy beach, I head to the nearby award-winning Wickaninnish Inn and into the kitchen of its Point restaurant that dramatically juts out over the rocks. It's where executive chef Clayton Fontaine enthuses about those ingredients harvested by these indigenous hook and line fishers and foragers and how they pepper his menu.
I think having a relationship with the indigenous suppliers is super important. We're so close. They were here before us. We're living on their land, and we need to pay respects to that. Not only from seasonality standpoint and all the reasons it makes sense for just food. I hope that more people follow in the footsteps if they're not. So they use day boats to go in and out, and really that means our fish is generally still in rigor, so we can't even typically use it the day we're getting it in. So it's better to have it relax until the stiffness wears off. But that's way fresher than anything that you're going to get through larger suppliers or at the store, just because most of those boats, they'll go out for 4 or 5 days. It's about as fresh as you can get, and it's coming from the waters right out here. We get Dungeness crab. We have sort of a surf and turf on our bar menu where just steak and crab, some vegetables, just like pretty classic. We're getting some halibut as well. So right now we have our fish main on the tasting menu. So just lightly seared, and then our trim's made into smoked brandad. And then we've taken some watercress that we got foraged from a little bit further up island. That's been made into a sauce. And then all the pulp left over from passing it through and making it smooth has been fermented and mixed with some sunflower seeds. And then that's a little condiment we put on top, and then just some nice fingerling potato chips and a bit more watercress. It is pretty much British Columbia on a plate. Our menu's seasonally, locally, and ingredient driven. We're working with foragers around us and some of the local purveyors just to get in ingredients that you might not find elsewhere. Different weeds, different seaweeds, sea vegetables, fish, barnacles, really whatever we can get our hands on that the coast offers, we'll try to use in some fashion, or at least experiment with.
With a coastal buffet that's all within easy reach, he collects his own sea peas, for instance, thimble, cinnamocha and salmon berries and spruce tips. A few flavours found in First Nations cooking too. With the Wick's so-called rustic elegance at nature's edge, its elevated dishes can also tell stories.
We had a tartare on the menu that was sort of inspired by pemmican, so an indigenous food where dried meats, berries, and animal fat, and almost energy bar type idea, I guess. So we took that, rubbed the meat in koji, let that sit. Then we seared that and chopped it as a regular tartare. And then we made a curd out of some of the venison fat. And then we had some huckleberries that we had frozen and packed away. So made huckleberry curd and then incorporated some spruce in there. And it's really just taking an idea like pemmican and then reimagining that in a fashion that makes sense for the place, makes sense for here in the menu. But then also if a diner really wants to start asking questions, there's a story there. That's important to me. Part of why restaurants appeal to me so much is the learning. And I think with the relation with the Indigenous and just the lands around us, people are happy to share what they know, share their knowledge, share their roots, share where they're from. And I think that's such an important part about food. We're starting to look back on the past, and really it's starting to shape the future of food, honestly. I think knowledge is power when you start talking about sustainable practices with food to really help shape the ocean, the earth, whatever it may be.
For Monocle, Interfino, I'm Lucy Hyslop.
Lucy Hyslop there. This is the menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's Henry King.
Luxembourg has been named as the most expensive country in the EU for food, according to new figures from Eurostat. The priciest alcoholic drinks can be found in Finland, largely because of heavy taxation and a state-run monopoly on the sale of alcohol, boosting prices. Meanwhile, if you're a fan of cheap eats, try Romania as the cheapest for food in the bloc, with semole, meat-filled cabbage rolls, a national favourite. Del Monte Foods, a canned fruit staple on American market shelves, has filed for bankruptcy in New Jersey. The 138-year-old company has secured $912 million, the equivalent of about €774 million of financing to keep the business operating. Selling items such as canned peaches, corn and sweet peas, the company has faced a decline in consumer demand as shoppers seek fresher alternatives. And as 4th of July celebrations occur throughout the day, The National Hot Dog and Sausage Council says an estimated 150 million hot dogs will be eaten across the USA. In Coney Island in New York City, America's top professional eater, Joey Chestnut, nicknamed Jaws, returns for the famous Nathan's 4th of July hot dog eating contest. He was banned last year after signing with a rival hot dog company. With perhaps the most controversial element, they were plant-based. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, Henry. This is the menu. Crisps or chips are a staple in many people's pantries across the globe. Whether you're popping open a packet to accompany a sandwich at lunchtime or pouring them into a bowl to share with friends with your aperitivo, they carry an immediate sense of cheerful, casual fun. The Brits like theirs with salt and vinegar, the Germans with paprika, while Italians will often just go ready salted. Endless varieties and countless different flavours have been developed across different markets, but apart from the taste, what is it about these salty potato snacks that make them so universally beloved? In her book, Crunch, An Ode to Crisps, Natalie Whittle traces the history and fortunes of the snack to understand its nostalgic appeal and figure out just why a bag of crisps always hits the spot. Earlier, this programme's producer Monica Lillis spoke to Natalie to find out more.
There's something about the whole world of crisps that really drew me in. I think that the part of that was a kind of classic manipulation, I suppose, that, not to sound cynical, but I think there is something absolutely brilliant about the way that crisps are an imaginative product as much as anything that's kind of really going to grab your taste buds. It's perfect for children because it's sort of really pushing the limits of what is real and what isn't. Your Monster Munch, you're eating a monster's foot. And I really like that kind of playful side of it as a child. And I think that, that was a kind of game that everyone joined in on, wearing hula hoops as rings on fingers and things like that. I suppose one of the things that I was really struck by was how that kind of product was able to really evolve over the course of a lifetime, sort of into adulthood. I felt quite loyal to crisps in a way that I think, some of the things that you are obsessed with as a child sort of fall away. And I think that that's by no means a unique kind of relationship that I have with crisps as a product. I think it is a national thing that you kind of, part of the enjoyment comes with it. You have your own private preferences, but then you can kind of join in a national conversation. And I think that is a really sort of British trait, sort of to enjoy that kind of overlap, I suppose.
As a society, especially here in the UK and probably in the wider world as well, we are so enamoured with this salty snack. So I wanted to kind of think about why we think that is. Is it just the flavour? Is it the crunch, like as the book is called? Or is it something to do with nostalgia? I think it's probably a combination of both.
I think, again, it sort of comes back to a personal relationship. I think that most people... I think that's one of the great things about, a lifetime relationship with food. It is something that, with all of the caveats around marketing and your own personal means, it is something that you sort of control. And I think that, you can you can step away from a bag of crisps. I find it hard, but
me too.
I think that there is a joy to that you're in control but you're sort of savoring something. And I think there is also research that's been published quite recently that shows there's a specific place in the brain that stores memories of these sort of very palatable, high fat, high salt foods. And so it's not just that we're kind of creatures who sort of savor memories as well as taste. I think there is an actual sort of pathway that's being built where, your brain sort of is physically lodging crisps as a good thing. And so there is that. And yes, and it is also, just as, if you're making a film, you put a huge amount of effort, I suppose, into the script, the scenery, the themes that people are interested in and storytelling. I think, crisp makers do this exactly the same thing. They think about, like, how does a crisp feel when you pick it up in your fingers, and all the way through to sort of, as you say, crunch, salivation, aftertaste? Is it a kind of a bogish flavour? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's not surprising that we love them, given that they're sort of incredibly well crafted, I suppose, even though they are an ultra-processed food ultimately.
I'm going to move on a little bit now to talk about the prawn cocktail chapter. As I mentioned when we were just talking there at the beginning, my favourite flavour is prawn cocktail. I'll put it out there. And I really appreciated this chapter about the flavour, and because it kind of read as, I kind of eat a packet of prawn cocktail at least once or twice a week, but I didn't realise this kind of history lesson behind it. At the moment, food is really involved with, inflation, and we are really dictated about what we eat at the moment because of rising costs, etc. And I just wanted you to maybe tell me how you think this sort of plays out in today's world.
Yeah, so 1970s was a time of, massive sort of like shock, scare, food inflation, and crisps sort of became a bit bound up in that in quite a complicated way because, one, prawn cocktail crisp as a flavour was sort of taking the mick out of the idea of a kind of pretentious sort of fanciness to what you would serve to your guests to sort of say something about who you were. They also reflected an economic reality, sort of a change that was coming from immigration, sort of primarily from Hong Kong, and the introduction of Chinese takeaway, I suppose, and this sort of sweet and sour mix that was quite novel at the time. And also sort of like going into the longer view of how that would change British society, because, you couldn't really, until the Chinese takeaway sort of came along at that time, most places that were open past 8 o'clock would be a sort of hotel, which is kind of a bit staid. So I think there's a sort of sense of fun in that. And I think that there's a lot that then gets taken for granted. And that is something that, we see a lot of, these kind of, the dream, all our wants and needs being available at our arm's reach at the supermarket. We're seeing a lot of that being interrupted by lots of different external forces, like climate change, inflation, supply chain interruption, things like Ukraine, Russia. That war also had an effect on crisps because of the shortage of sunflower oil from Ukraine. So yeah, I think that prawn cocktail really embodied that for me, and I wanted to kind of look at it more closely. It sort of had got also snarled up in these sort of quite cynically deployed, Boris Johnson's sort of tub-thumping op-eds in the Telegraph saying, EU wants to steal prawn cocktail crisps, which was actually a lie. It was sort of a mistake that a civil servant had failed to include sweetened crisps on a sort of pre-approved list of things that an EU directive on sweeteners would kind of agree to exempt. And so, there are lots of things that sort of just that one flavour of crisps sort of actually brought to the surface about UK society. And I did find that kind of, an interesting one to tackle.
What is the one thing you hope a reader will take away from this book?
I mean, I think that sort of, hopefully it will resonate with people thinking about food as this sort of kind of a lifelong, I suppose, a lifelong relationship that does change, I suppose, as they do. But to think of that sort of push and pull as well about, how your tastes change as you go through life, but also the sort of all of the multifaceted sort of inputs that go into the products that we find. I mean, not the most poetic way to put it, but I think it I hope that it sort of speaks to people about how we sort of love crisp, but it's an extremely sort of complex part of British life at the same time.
Thanks, Monica. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's a midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighbourhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This programme was produced by Monica Lillis and our sound engineer was Flynn Simons. Thanks for listening, and until next week.